Okay, hello everyone. I want to start by giving a warm welcome to all the online and on-site attendees. Thank you so much for being here with us and choosing this lecture. And before we start, I have to say some technical stuff. So there will be a Q&A session at the end, and we will be taking questions from the Eventory app. So if you want to ask questions, please use the Eventory app. If you don't have it, download it, please. And you can also vote for questions from other attendees, so you can vote for the ones that you want to be asked. Also, please do not sit in the entrance here, just because of the safety reasons. So if you see someone that comes in late, just tell them that they can, sit. It will be better. And with that out of the way, I can finally say welcome to the plant-based protein lecture. And I will say a few things about the host. So Karolina Centkowska has been part of animal welfare movement since 2016. She's part of Otwarte Klatki and Anima International. She's been in plant-based campaigns, and she's been working in social media, partnership and plant-based challenge. And let's give the stage to Karolina Centkowska.
Thank you. Thank you. So welcome all of you to the panel called The State of Alternative Protein. Where do we go from here as activists? And with me here today, there is Alex Myers from the Good Food Institute. He has a background in animal welfare project management and organizational development, and now leads the Good Food Institute's European team to work on accelerating the growth of alternative protein across the continent, so they are no longer alternative. And for me, the Good Food Institute is known best for their great reports, research, and it's just a best place for me to look for resources. So I'm excited that you're here with us. Give it up for Alex. And it's Rune Christopher Dragsdahl from the Vegetarian Society of Denmark. He's Secretary General of the Vegetarian Society of Denmark and Regional Representative for Europe and Director of Policy Initiatives at International Vegetarian Union. And from what I know about him and the Vegetarian Society of Denmark is that their actions paved the way for a few years ago for a significant governmental funding for plant-based products and plant-based sector of over 1.25 billion kroner. So that's extremely impressive, and I'm glad that we can talk about this kind of things here today. Yeah, for Rune Christopher, everyone. And it's one and only my close colleague, Maciek Otremski. He is responsible for strategic partnerships at Roślinniejemy, so our Polish campaign of Anima International that is focusing on transforming the food system in Poland. On a daily basis, he cooperates with the food industry, provides consulting services, helps companies to understand the massive consumer interest in plant-based products. And his friends and colleagues know him as Poland's most important plant-based industry representative. So it's Maciek. Okay. And so yeah, let's start with the basics. So I wanted to ask all of you about how do you think that interventions that you focus on a daily basis in your organizations are working for good to influence change for the animals? So let's just quickly go through the theory of change of your actions. And maybe let's start with Alex for the beginning.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes. Great. Hello. So the Good Food Institute Europe's theory of change is basically looking at the supply side of the market rather than the demand side of the market. So there's a lot of people who talk to consumers and try and talk to consumers about eating more sustainably, eating plant-based diets for the animals, for the climate, and so on. That's great. What we're trying to do is supplement that by looking at the supply side of the industry. So trying to take meat and make it better. So take alternative proteins, meaning plant-based, cultivated, fermentation-derived meats, also dairy, also eggs, and then finding ways to make them taste just as good or better, be the same price or even cheaper, to be just as convenient. We're also looking into things like nutrition, other barriers that might prevent people from buying these products. So if we can make the alternatives no longer alternative, they become the defaults that people will choose because it's the thing in front of them in the supermarkets that's cheap, that's tasty, and that's nice and quick and easy for them. So that's what we're working on.
Great. So, Rune Christopher, how would you describe it for Vegetarian Society of Denmark?
Well, I think apart from probably subscribing to a lot of the same mindset as you mentioned, I think more generally, I think we see it the way that, being a vegetarian organization, historically you also used to focus on individual people, but really we are more and more looking into when you have limited resources, you have limited funding, then you have to focus on professionals, because if you can influence one professional, that person will impact maybe 20, 50, 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 other people. So generally looking more and more into how we can engage different professional entities, and that can be anything from doctors as a professional, or even better, doctors, organizations, or it can be the kitchen workers, the food professionals who cook the food, who prepare the food. It can be the food industry, labor unions, the farmers unions, all of these other associations out there. Some of them might be opposed to us some of the time still, but even trying to open doors into the most unlikely places. So yeah, targeting professionals, but that's not saying we're not also, you also still have to talk to regular people, but I would still say it's largely about reaching out to the professionals.
Awesome. And Maciek?
Okay, so I could possibly kind of repeat of what you guys said, because our approach is kind of aligned, I would say. I think what I would add in terms of roślinniejemy and our approach at Anima International as well is that we kind of set ourselves this goal of not only introducing more plant-based products, but also switching our thinking into removing the animal ingredients or animal sourced products from the food system. And this is our end goal. So we like to think about our plant-based alt protein work in that way. And also considering the fact that we have limited resources, a lot of our effort is invested into creating a narrative for the food industry where, as you said, like alternative proteins are not alternative. So we also issue a lot of reports. We try to work with the stakeholders that can influence other important actors in the food industry, so that it's not only us who are kind of preaching the new food, the new protein, but it's actually the people from within the industry who are advocating in our name. And I think like that's maybe something that is quite important. That is quite important for our theory of change.
Yeah, so that's great to hear from all of you. I completely agree with all the points mentioned. I think it was quite important also for me when we were discussing more consumer-based approach, that this approach would support all of our other actions in a way that it would help the institutional work or corporate work get further, not to be the focus on its own. So if we do like things that are a little bit more effective in itself because they reach consumers, it's also like it's worth doing if it gives something else to the game. Sometimes it's like all connected. And I think also it's important to like mention how you all kind of are talking about alternative protein, not plant-based. And I think that maybe if not everyone is like realizing why is that, maybe one of you would like to tell us why the approach of transformation of food system is something that some of the organizations are picking up on right now. I know that Maciek, it's a very like close topic to what we are working with. So like, do you want to give like a sentence of how we are thinking about it?
Oh, I thought that was a question to Alex, but because I think like you have it covered quite well with Good Food Institute. But yeah, as I stated in the beginning, like it's not only about making people eat more plant-based food, but it's actually like about making the industry use less animal origin ingredients, and sometimes it's not always going to be the plant-based proteins. Sometimes it's maybe even removing certain ingredients or fostering interventions that are like on the kind of different kind of levers when it comes to, let's say, broad food industry. And well, we can of course also talk about like precision fermentation and cultivated meat, which is always a bit mind-boggling for us in Poland because our campaign's name is called Roślinnie jemy, which translates to kind of we thrive on plant-based food. And then we are also like one of the few who are actually interested in cultivated meat and in all the new protein forms of production. So we kind of took on this risk of like communicating about cultivated meat and so on, even though our kind of domain in the early days was plant-based protein. But I think like we find it equally important because eventually any solution that would work on scale and would help to make factory farming obsolete is great for us, no matter if it's plant-based or cultivated or maybe not insects, but
yeah, sure. Alex, do you have anything to add on that? The Good Food Institute is even like named in the more, I'd say, like futuristic approach in a way that it's about the good food, not about plant-based or like vegetarian, which is the case for our like campaigns. So do you have anything to add to that?
Thank you. So I think it really boils down to what problem we're looking at and what the solutions can be. So plant-based is a relatively old solution. Plant-based alternatives, plant-based meats have been around for quite a while, and they're getting better all the time, which is super exciting. There's other ways, there's other technologies, some even older still, like fermentation, biomass fermentation. We've been fermenting food like beer and bread for thousands of years. This is not new technology for us, but taking that and making meat or making casein proteins like milk using yeast or using kind of bacteria or something else, that's a new take on it, and that's a super exciting potential. Cultivated meat is much newer still, so that's really very, very new technology, and we're still understanding exactly what the potential of that could be. It looks phenomenal when you look at the data of how good that's going to be for the climate, how much better it's going to be for land, for water. All of those metrics look like they'll be 90+% higher, 90+% better than traditional factory farming. So animal welfare aside, there's lots of potential for lots of technologies to be leveraged and to be used to try to supplement what is already happening in the world. Old technologies, new technologies, keeping laser focused on what the solutions are and the problems that we're trying to fix.
If I could just briefly build on that, I think thinking about food system transformation, I think like we possibly would agree that alternative protein is one thing, but thinking about like Sharon mentioned, like hospitals and so on, we cannot also omit basically like traditional or like foods that are plant-based by default or by accident, because at least in my opinion, for quite a while we've been like pushing alternative protein and plant-based meats so much that we forgot that it's like one part of the puzzle, and maybe some people are more keen on beans or like those kind of traditional foods. So as you ask about like food system transformation in general, I would say that maybe it's also important to kind of make a little loop and come back to this kind of more staple traditional foods, thinking about making the society more eager to eat more plant-based.
Okay, and Aaron, Christopher, would you have something to add to that?
Yeah, so also, we should not agree too much either, so I guess on the other hand, we shouldn't fight either. But no, I think from a broad perspective, you can say our approach generally in Denmark, and I have a presentation about that tomorrow, more about the policy work there. But what I can say, one thing I noticed was that it has been quite important to talk about plant-based as something that both includes tech solutions and good old-fashioned food cooked from the bottom. When you insist that the concept have both things inside it, it's more difficult for people to be against the cause, because then both the people who love a home-cooked meal and from scratch and organic foods, they can also be on board, but also the tech people can be on board. And it appeals both to the right and the left wing. So I think there's an importance in keeping the plant-based as covering everything from really technical, highly scientific imitation products all the way to good old-fashioned food on the plant-based. Then when it comes to fermentation and cultivated, I feel it's very clear. I'm sometimes wondering, like, for me, some of those technologies that try to imitate animal products, like 100%, not just 99.9%, but 100%, are probably, it seems to me, especially for the people who would eventually be most resistant to eat something which is not identical enough or not appealing or tasty enough. And for me, I think we might have a challenge. In my view, some of the flexitarians, they're pretty much on board the plant-based wagon, but the other 50-60% of the population who are much more hesitant to change, they're probably the ones we're developing cultivated meat for. But these people are still not ready, and they're definitely not ready to pay more. So we need to get cultivated meat and from these solutions to get down, obviously, price-wise, to see whether they would then bring those people on board, or even just bring the industry on board. The industry might choose to use it instead because it's cheaper or easier for the industry as well altogether. But I'm still, it seems sometimes I have this idea, probably you also have your points about that, and certainly you have also. It seems to be that maybe in the mid-term, cultivated meat would better imitate animal products. But I'm just wondering still in the very long term, eventually plant-based version 20.0, if it can imitate as well, it would normally have lower energy consumption and still be eventually the most efficient solution. But we might need cultivated meat for 10, 20, 30, 40 years until we reach that point with plant-based. I don't know what your thoughts are about that.
It's really interesting. I think when we're looking at the products that are currently on the market that people are buying and the transition that needs to happen, it's extraordinarily unlikely that the majority of the population will transition from burgers and sausages to chickpeas. I mean, by all means, let's try. But that feels unlikely that that's going to be the direct transition. So anything which can take flexitarians and give them something which is super comfortable, super cheap, super tasty, and help to migrate them towards something which actually isn't that scary and it's actually really good, all of those steps are positive. So there's also a sweet spot, I think, between some of these technologies. So taking plant-based foods, plant-based meats, and potentially using something like cultivated fats, cultivated animal fats, which is scientifically slightly more straightforward than cultivated steak would be, which requires all that scaffolding. Using animal fats, cultivated animal fat, as a supplement in the plant-based burgers will give it all of that mouthfeel, all of that sizzling texture that you would get from a meat sausage, which people crave. So melding those products together, I think, is probably also an interesting step in the journey.
If I could add one thing to that, I think one thing that we are maybe a bit missing as a, let's say, plant-based movement, because we talk a lot about like taste, price, and convenience, and that's the bottom line. But I think like where we are still lacking a bit is to make plant-based foods aspirational. So like make people think that it's actually cool to choose plant-based. I think like Oatly did a great job making their oatmeal like a cultural product, and the packaging and everything around the brand is kind of hedonistic. And this is something that is not that explored in the plant-based advocacy movement, and yeah, maybe could also be, thought through even more to kind of make people crave it because it's cool. It makes me like hip or whatever.
Yeah, I think it's like a very good point, and like smoothly directs us into the question that I was going to ask about what interventions should we like focus on, because there are so many things to do in terms of like how do we influence the market? Like, do we influence the market in a way to make the products cheaper, to like kind of support them in the marketing and in making the plant-based and other alternative options more sexy, more approachable for customers? And also, when it comes to interventions, do we focus on the corporate outreach? Do we focus on institutional outreach? Do we do customer work still? Like, what would be the balance for all of those? Because I think it's a big question that we oftentimes ask ourselves, and can also either of those function without the others. It's kind of like they are all connected. It's a cycle. So what is your take on that? Maybe, Ron, Christopher, could you start? I know you have like experience in institutional work and corporate work, so like I'm interested to know.
Yeah, so like in Denmark, we have some more and more countries are getting either at a small level or a little more established a plant-based kind of industry association, a business association for plant-based businesses. There's one thing is there are some broader alliances across countries, but within countries, it's like I think only the maybe US has a really established plant-based business association. I don't remember if the UK has. Does it even have a few professional employees? Yeah, but in most of the European countries, it's kind of really small. So in Denmark, we do have one a plant-based business association. It has what corresponds to 2 employees. And then we're an NGO. We have what corresponds to 13 full-time employees, and it's like 18 people. So that means we've seen it as a very important task for us to kind of support them in their journey towards becoming an association. They have like almost 100 business members, and I think that they're saying that's a record in Europe. So that's pretty well done for a business association. But they still have really limited power, actually, really limited funds. So in that position, what we've done is we've done a lot to talk them up, to help in different ways that supports them, to refer people to them, to include them in some funding projects, even to give them to help them grow. But at the same time, we really had to keep being independent because we are an NGO, and there are some of these companies which it's fine to be in it for the money, but that also means there are companies who are just trying to get some quick money and launching some shitty products. And I think we should be honest about that as NGOs. There are a lot of crap products out there that should never have been launched and that has damaged the reputation of the plant-based industry. So I think a good role, just my perspective at least, could be for NGOs to really support the idea of the plant-based industry, to support everyone, to be there with a helping hand in many ways, talk positively generally about the products, you can say, about the potential as well. And particularly maybe to help some of the startups who have to help them get into the game, but also remind ourselves we are independent NGOs and we should also be critical towards certain products, because otherwise in the long term we might not be helping our own cause. And it appears to me, at least in Denmark, parts of the plant-based industry can be a little frustrated if a plant-based NGO are not just embracing everything that they're doing. So how to find that balance to make the industry understand that we are really their friends, but we can't just support anything. Our strengths come from being independent also. That's just some reflections.
Maciek, and what would you...
No, I just had a thought about the egg alternative that you tried and you gave feedback, and companies just kind of started hating us because we gave critical feedback about the product. But I had this thought when you asked this question. I had actually 2 thoughts. Like one thing is like, how do we navigate in the time when we see that the sales of the plant-based meat are not growing as much as we expected, and we kind of in Poland we had this kind of we're in a very privileged position of the market booming for a long time, like 2-3 years, and now it's still growing. But I think like we should get ready to face the slowdown, and I'm not sure if we can like still like boast on this like kind of business potential argument with the plant-based companies, and like in terms of encouraging others to step in the market. So that's one thing that I was thinking, and we kind of we are a small team, so I feel very a bit jealous of like GFI having like a lot of people doing different things. So that's very cool. We are like 4 of us working in the plant-based outreach team, and to kind of, as you say, like balance out. We see that like there's a lot of things going on in the food industry, and the plant-based products are hitting the shelves. So shall we already like move to the policy work and just leave the industry to do their own job? And it's a tough question, because I think if we kind of withdraw and just stop kind of nourishing the industry with that narrative, it might the interest might eventually also fall down. At the same time, as Alex said, and Rune also said, like this kind of fostering the systemic change feels super important. I think like it's a new trend in the animal rights advocacy, but also like protein advocacy, to hit the political angles of food system change. So yeah, it's always like kind of a balance, and I would lean more towards investing more in policy work, but I wouldn't like abandon, let's say, like corporate outreach or that kind of narrative work for the food industry, kind of taking it for granted already, because also like the products that hit the shelves aren't always the top-notch ones, but there are also other issues. So yeah.
And Alex, what do you think about that?
So for GFI, we focus on 3 main audiences in most of our affiliates, wherever they are in the world. One of those audiences is decision makers and policy makers. So we get very deep into conversations with the people who really make the decisions, the people who help to map and to progress that regulatory path to market for products, the people who might be involved in putting labeling challenges forwards against some of the products and foods which we're looking at. So we can also have those conversations to unlock pools of research and development money from national governments, from international governments as well, international governmental bodies, which can then be used to invest in the second pillar of what we do, which is the science and technology side. So things like cultivated meat, because it is so new, there's an awful lot of progress that needs to happen there. So we have a team of people who have scientific backgrounds, and they work with universities, academics, students, really energizing that ecosystem. So as well as unlocking the research money from the decision makers, finding ways to get people together to have like a coalition of scientists working on particular research problems which can really accelerate the market. And then the third group that we work with is the industry. So we work closely with big companies. We get very deeply into conversations with big multinationals, small companies as well, startups, investors. Soon we'll be hiring for an infrastructure investment manager who's going to join our team in Europe, and they will be looking at the kind of the upstream pipeline of ingredients and equipment and everything else which is needed to actually energize the earlier stages. So in times like COVID, when meat prices went through the ceiling, there wasn't really the capacity to actually create the plant-based alternatives at the speed necessary to fill that gap. So what can we do to actually accelerate that? So we're looking very holistically, very systematically about all of those things. So I appreciate that some people in the room probably find working closely with industry can be quite challenging. And that there's different ways to do that. I would say, good. If there's different ways to do that, let's have different ways to do it. I think, speaking to your point, Carolina, it's supplementary. Having different people working on different things together, talking to each other, communicating, making sure that we're being quite transparent about how we're acting, why we're doing what we're doing, and trying to find ways to kind of all work together on different angles. I think that's probably where the sweet spot lies.
Thank you. So this is something that actually like keeps me up at night, thinking about all these different interventions, whether we can just put all of our eggs in one basket, so to speak, and thinking about also how do we go from here in the future, because we cannot be sure that these actions that we now think are the best will actually result in more plant-based or just more friendly to animals world in the future. So the question would be like, how do we measure the success of our interventions when they are so different? With institutional work, for example, it's so effective when it's already done, but you sometimes have to put a lot of effort into making anything happen. And I mean, Aaron, Christopher, I would like to start with you because you have this great thing to talk about how you managed to carry out the funds from the government, but it's also, I think, culturally and country specific. But yes, I'm interested to hear how all of you what is your approach to thinking of what's successful in a certain way.
That's such a difficult question. There's so many interventions and they can all, I know, sorry, blah, 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 my answer to that, but it's, all know there's so many different interventions that can each be respected in different ways, and it's difficult to say ahead of it. I would say it in a way, I think one thing at a broad level that seems, I think, important, also in a situation where you have the collapse of the stock of Beyond Meat and of Oatly and some hopes, some critical articles here and there, is a market, what is now happening, what happened there, some pessimism among some people. I think there it really matters if one can build within each country, but of course across countries, but if you can, it appears to me like despite the stories of Beyond Meat and Oatly, which have always circulated as examples of because they were really, really overrated from the beginning and then pooh, fell. But despite those stories, there's still a general optimism among food professionals in Denmark. So I think, and that takes some systemic work over years to make sure that generally, not everyone, but if most of the food organizations, even the farmers associations, food industry associations, if most of them still talk positively and think positively about this, and if they can understand that there is a difference between the short-term game and the long-term prospects. I haven't heard anyone really questioning the long-term prospects of this market. So in that period, in between that, I think as organizations, we can do a lot to keep faith in this. Because it is not just faith, it's not religion, it is a lot of very objective parameters saying that we know it will go this way, but yeah, we can't promise if it will be in 5, 10 or 20, hopefully not later than that, years. We can't promise that exactly that timeline. So I think I would say as a broad answer to that question, anything that there's any kind of intervention that still keeps, I would say, other food system professionals on track and optimistic is an effective intervention. Because yeah, if you really generally start getting into a negative mood all across the food system, it will have multiple effects across it. so keeping that, but not in a naive faith, but there are just still so many good data and consumer. There are so many things we know, whether it's the price parity, a lot of things that will have impacts. So that would be my very simple answer to that. Of course, it does help that's also a big priority of the GFI, I know, to get more public funding into research and development. So getting some funds in place, you can say that, again, not to talk about the Danish fund, but again, to get, ideally every country should have some national funding, or the EU should have cross-cutting funding to larger things here, because there's still badly needed funding for this whole thing, because the animal industry has been so heavily funded for, well, at least 50 years, more probably, but especially the last half century. So there's still not a fair playing field. It's a completely unlevel playing field, because you have an animal industry which is building on decades of huge amounts of support and is still getting it. So that's just a very basic thing. Maybe focusing on that in itself is really important as well.
Maciek, what's your take?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that 6-7 years ago, it wasn't a topic. I remember like this more or less like when GFI was founded, when we also started working on a like corporate level, and now it's 2023. We see like people from GFI, people from ProVeg giving comments to talking to the biggest industry media. Like I see like GFI commenting on Food Navigator, most of the stuff. Same for like same for ProVeg as well. So this is, and that applies also to us in Poland. Like we became like a credible source of, let's say, inspiration or a narrative, and that could be, I would say, that could be measured as a success, to kind of think that we started from almost zero to kind of make alternative protein an important topic in the discussion of climate change, food industry in general. So also when you think about like long-term game, this is something that we are still like on the very early stage, and I would see it as a very, very important kind of foundation for the next steps to take. And the other thing is that I think like we haven't explored that well yet in Poland, but I find it quite interesting, and maybe someone in the audience have already, so please shout out, is I think that what could be a potential great way to kind of measure the success is to kind of get commitments from companies that work with food in one way or another, like the cage-free commitments or like the broiler commitments. Let's say like 50% food served in a given franchise is plant-based by this and that year. I think like that could be an interesting, maybe more kind of measurable way of measuring our successes, and could be a valid strategy as well. And I don't think it's that explored within the, let's say, plant-based advocacy movement. Some companies do that by themselves, like IKEA, or I think Sodexo as well. Also, big shout out to the French team of Anima, Assiette Végétale. They cover university canteens in municipalities, and they actually got some commitments of like 50% of meals being vegetarian by in the short time. So that is very, very cool, and it's very measurable. So yeah, that's I think like a valid strategy as well.
Yeah, and Alex, what do you think about measuring the success?
Yeah, there's many ways to do it. I mean, ultimately, the success that we're looking for is finding good plant-based products which people are buying. And the journey to get there, there's a huge number of successes along that journey. So Rune Christopher's right, we can actually count financially how much money is being invested into research and development. We can look at the products coming onto market. Are they taste and price competitive or not? We can look at policymakers in terms of like the level of support that alternative proteins has, and that's not necessarily as straightforward as we might like, of course, because people can change their minds. People are quite complicated like that. One thing also to factor in is that there is a spectrum. If we were to calibrate today with all the policymakers across Europe, there would be a spectrum of how they look. We're not going to take people from one end of the spectrum and radically change their minds to the other overnight. But any migration in the direction that we need to move in is a success. And we can look at that and measure attitudinal shifts, regardless of where their starting point is and regardless of where they're moved to, even if it's not great. Taking people from negative to neutral, that's still a win. So there's an awful lot of potential there that we can be measuring. So yeah.
And you can always look at meat consumption in your country. I think like in Poland, we are quite lucky to have quite decent data. And it's shown that like in the recent year, I think it's 4% down. So, well, it's a success.
Germany too, as well. Germany is one country where there is a fall in meat consumption right now, and there is a very strong rise in plant-based consumption. So it's not entirely clear whether one is displacing the other. It's probably not a linear relationship, but we need to explore that a little bit more to understand. Cultivated meat is also quite interesting to look at milestones because it's so much newer. We're seeing the milestones happen in front of our eyes within our lifetimes. So 10 years ago when Mark Post, I think it was literally last week, it was the 10-year anniversary of Mark Post's first cultivated meat burger put on display in London. That burger cost something like $250,000 US. Now you can buy a skewer of cultivated chicken in Singapore for about $16. In the US, it's a little bit more expensive, but it's being sold now in San Francisco for, I think it's about $200 for a multi-course meal that includes cultivated chicken as well. So imagine if that happens in 10 years, imagine what the next 10 years is going to hold. It's extremely exciting to kind of see those milestones happening right in front of our eyes.
So that's actually a great getaway to the next question because it's about the future. So having all of that in mind that we discussed, all the interventions that we can take and the topic of measuring the success, what would you say is the next step for not only your organization or your team, but for us as a movement? What we as activists fighting and working for more plant-based, more animal-friendly world and for the transformation of food market, what should we do? What should we focus on and try to support the most? What is our role in it? Because maybe at some point, some of those things that we are doing will be taken over by the companies. So we no longer have to make the plant-based sexy or interesting because it already is, and companies like Oatly are putting a lot of money in it. So yeah, what's the next step for us? Maybe Rune Christopher, do you have an idea for that?
Yeah, so many ideas, but I'll leave some for you guys as well. I think just the whole health thing is an issue where the industry is not allowed to communicate, well, maybe a little, but basically nothing really. There's a lot of regulations telling that companies cannot use health claims. So that's where NGOs can actually do a lot. We can come with all the, as long as there's a basis for it, but there are still a lot of health claims and more health studies also now on meat imitations, etc. But generally we do know a lot about plant-based foods and the health benefits, but the industry is not allowed to use it. So that's a major stronghold. I think we should have some more nutrition experts on board, all our NGOs actually, that could be helpful. And that also can diminish some of the resistance among health professionals who are concerned, oh, but about old people, will they die from protein deficiency and things like that. So you need, maybe many of the organizations should add a nutrition expert, I think. That's just a very concrete thing. And then more broadly, or very specifically actually, I can say that this plant-based action plan, it has been delayed in Denmark, but it is coming because there is an agreement behind it. But when it is coming, I'm hoping that it will not just be empty words, that it will have something concrete. And if that does happen, that would really, really give a viable path for all countries to demand. We also want a plant-based national action plan in our country. So I really hope it will happen, but I can't promise yet. But what it actually will entail, that action plan, because if you have governments taking ownership and each country making their own action plan for this, it can also be a broader protein strategy. But it's tricky because then often the feed industry wants to be part of it, of the game as well. But I think that getting each country should have their own strategies for this, and we need to work on that because that gives a broad framework within each country.
And Alex, what is the plant-based future for Europe?
I would definitely agree with Rune Christopher that finding, firstly, nutrition, looking at exactly what the nutritional properties of different products are. And again, there is a spectrum with what is on the market now. Some products are extremely healthy and have micronutrients that are showing better values than meat, which is super exciting. Other products, not so much. So it's very difficult to generalize. I think a lot of people would like to hold plant-based meats nutritionally. Again, looking at the equivalence with chickpeas, with a bowl of chickpeas, rather than the equivalence to the products which they're actually trying to replicate, like sausages, which are not known for their health qualities, let's face it. So that's super exciting. I also totally agree that a protein strategy, having governments actually planning, investing in where the transition is going to be. There's other actors as well in the protein transition, in this process, who need to be considered and need to be supported. So farmers are a very good example of that. There's some amazing opportunities for farmers to transition here, but they're going to need support in that. So what does that look like? What might subsidies look like at a national level if they were to transition from pastoral subsidies to more arable subsidies so that products could be produced to make plant-based foods and things which are just a lot better, for a lot more sustainable generally. So lots of opportunities there. I think also looking at the global south, looking at the global majority, where's the role here as well? So factoring in elements of malnutrition, what could be used with, say, fermentation technology, which again is old tech, it's relatively straightforward. How could that be used to solve malnutrition issues in other parts of the world outside the ones that we're currently focusing on? So lots of interesting things that will happen. And we're obviously tracking and supporting the regulatory path to market for companies who are taking things forwards in Europe as well. So Aleph Farms, based in Israel, has just put in applications a couple of weeks back to sell cultivated meat in Switzerland and the UK. They're the first 2 applications for cultivated meat in Europe, so extremely exciting to see how those go. Formo in Germany is applying also for precision fermentation, to look for precision fermentation dairy and get that on the market. So lots of really exciting things coming up. So yeah, it's going to be a wild ride.
Thank you. And Maciek, are you excited for the future?
Well, yeah, I am excited, and I think like I would totally agree with what you said. However, I would still like ask, like, I think like we should ask ourselves a question about a viable model for the food system transformation, because we are talking about it and there are some ideas, but seriously, I don't have a clue like how to kind of, include farmers and like how to make it really viable, not make it like one single idea of like transforming chicken farm to a mushroom farm, but actually make it work in a huge national, pan-national, global scale, if we want to see a system where animals are not used for food. So this is something that we talk about a lot, but I don't think we have a pathway, or we see some maybe minor steps, but we don't have that kind of big plan, at least in my opinion. Maybe you have some big thinkers in your organization. This is like mind-boggling for me, because I keep talking about it. I see like maybe short-term vision and a big long-term vision, but this kind of mid-term steps, this is something that is super hard, and I would like it to be more developed. And if there are any big thinkers in this room, maybe that's something that you can explore more. But I'm excited for all this, I would say, small, big steps that are happening on the EU level, on the global level as well. So there's definitely, as Alex said, opportunities for the transition to happen.
So yeah, we are shortly running out of time, but there is one more important question that I feel like we need to answer or talk about, because I think it's a question that we ask ourselves in general, whether what we do and the tier of change that we follow is something that will actually work. And recently there was this report by Rethink Priorities discussing whether the theory about price, taste, convenience, if we achieve all of that, will we actually make consumers choose plant-based options? And I already have talked about it with Alex yesterday a little bit. So I think that if we can briefly just touch on it, I think it's interesting to know all of your perspective, and then we will answer just a few questions from the audience.
I can go first.
So
yeah, the taste, price, convenience dynamic is something that's come from research over quite a few studies. One thing that's always tricky when you study consumer choice is that what consumers tell you is probably not actually what they're going to do when they're in the supermarket. If I knew exactly how consumers think and could influence it perfectly, I would be the billionaire that Sharon was talking about earlier, funding all of your charities. It's something that comes with a lot of complexity. However, the bulk of the studies that we've seen, if not all of them, still value taste and price in particular as the highest things. So even that study from Rethink Priorities, taste was right up there as consistently the top thing in each of those studies that he was citing, 3 of them, I think. So price right now as well, I think from the studies and from the research that we see, price is significantly important in Europe, particularly at a cost of living crisis when inflation is so high. So convenience, possibly less so. Nutrition, we're talking about other kind of factors that influence people when they come into the supermarket. Some people are influenced by their rural farmers in their neighborhoods and they want to support local products, and that's great too. So let's understand that. It's a great question for Rethink Priorities to be asking. It's always good to be testing our assumptions with this and looking at things with fresh eyes. So it's great to have that opportunity to reflect on it. There is definitely more than taste, price, and convenience, but for us, that's a great place to start. We're still so far from those things. When we're further down the line and we have cheaper, tastier products coming to market, that will give us an opportunity also to reevaluate that data, have a look at if there are still blocks like nutrition or other things that we need to also be looking at. But still, taste and price in particular are absolutely key.
Okay, and Christopher, yeah?
I feel very confident that the businesses as such will respond to the price factor, because if it's just 1 cent cheaper, they'll go for it. If you also have the taste and the rest of it in place. So I feel really confident that all the professionals, anywhere in food service broadly, they will choose it as soon as the price gets down to it, because they also have their own whatever CO2 reports, numbers, measures, targets, and their stakeholders, etc., will demand that. So that's on the price factor. But apart from that, I really think there is strong research on nudging. I can say, believe strongly in nudging. You can say that when you do implement the most effective nudging interventions, when you make the green thing the easiest or even the only thing, or people actively have to ask for something else, that switches the numbers completely. There's this quite cited Danish study, and of course you might not get the same numbers in all contexts, but it was still, they made 2 conferences, and first they served meat as default, and you had to set a cross, I'm a vegetarian, or you want a vegetarian meal, and there was 6% who chose vegetarian. Then they made the opposite, the default was vegetarian, and you had to ask for meat. Only 13% asked for meat, 87% kept the veg default. So that's of case, there might be different numbers and other circumstances, but I think the evidence is really strong on the default thing. And there are a lot of institutional actors who will do it if it is as tasty and as cheap. So yes, I strongly believe in the price and convenience and nudging. Yeah.
That's interesting that it was actually a question asked by the audience and the most upvoted. So I think we are very trendy right now. We are like really on the wave. Maciek, and
yeah,
you?
I just wanted to say that we keep talking about taste, price, convenience from the consumer's perspective. But as you started a bit on the industry side, we might think about it a bit more from the, let's say, like product formulations. If, let's say, precision fermented egg albumin is cheaper and safer for cookie producer to use than regular egg, they will go for it. So it is very important to also take that perspective. But looking at the consumer side, as you said, it's like a foundation or a bottom line that I think like we should all advocate for. But nudging, thinking about like social norms change is key. And maybe we talk a lot about like systemic change, corporate outreach, those kind of things. I still think there's a lot of space for smart, well thought, consumer directed plant-based advocacy or like plant-based interventions. So this is something that maybe we should even think more if we want to have society on board or make like bigger parts of society on board. Because there, I think like this, for so many years, there were so many activists advocating for more plant-based vegan lifestyle. And well, we weren't so successful. I think like we could be more. So I would definitely like to see more homework, more thinking, more diving into like research how to actually affect social norms. But yeah, taste, price, convenience is important.
Great. So the next question from the audience that I find really interesting is precision fermentation overlooked by tech investors and food companies compared to cultivated meat? Do any of you want to like take a voice on that?
I can make a first hit and then you go for it. But like in Denmark, it's really ridiculous. You know, one of these companies that is selling drugs, obesity drugs, Novo Nordisk, has now become one of the world's most valuable companies, surpassing a lot of world famous brands. They're extremely valuable, more than the Danish combined annual gross product now. It's quite crazy. But a company like them, they believe very strongly in that. The foundation behind it believes very strongly. So there's a major players here, that's just saying now from Denmark, but also in other countries. There's still a major belief in it. Maybe specific companies who try something may again bankrupt or fall. They might fly or fall or fail or whatever. But I think generally there's a strong belief in it. But again, who will eventually make it scalable? And with, I think, energy costs the last year did put a halt to some companies. There was an Israeli company was going to open a big factory in Denmark with the support of some of these big Danish companies within the fermentation knowledge. But then they decided not to do it. And it's still not clear whether that was due to Danish regulation or whether it was also, I remember him saying in the presentation last year at an event that Plantevækst Anima held in Denmark, that he said their energy costs were quite high. So I guess that's a problem until you can get very free or unlimited and low priced energy. But maybe you have more to say on that.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that pretty much all alternative proteins are slightly underinvested in. For precision fermentation is definitely a fascinating one, but it comes in hotspots. So Denmark is really very much a hotspot, as is Israel, as is Germany. Other countries, not so much. It's just newer technology in those. So it would be great to be seeing more startups being encouraged and supported from national government level to do more with precision fermentation. So the regulatory path to market, I believe, still follows a novel foods regulation in the EU, so relatively straightforward and extremely robust. So those products can be really trusted when they come to market, which is fantastic. So there's definitely a lot more to do there. But in terms of whether it's underinvested, I would say yes, fundamentally. Whether it's underinvested compared to others like cultivated meat, I would question that. I think there could be definitely space for an awful lot more investment in both.
Okay, let's move to the next question because we have a few of them. Let's just give it a go. And there was a very upvoted question, so I will ask it. And it's more from the activist stand of view, I think, because it's about whether eating cultivated meat will cause a moral problem long term as well as short term for our costs. Then the person is explaining about how it would legitimate to eat and see animals as someone you can eat, and maybe it's worth to put a point of view for that from our perspective. I think.
Well, the big question would be: do majority people consider eating as a moral thing? So, most of the people don't think about when they put a chicken nugget on their plate, do they think if it's moral or not to eat it? So if we think about majority of the people, I don't know if the switch would be kind of seamless. Would it do any harm? That would be my brief take.
I guess it's also a question is it expected in the long term that one might be able to produce it entirely without something coming from living animals someday in the future? Because from that's, I guess, the principal ethical vegan question behind that. But I would assume that someday you would also be able to make the initial cells artificially at some point. That should be possible. But that's a long-term question, and I'm a very pragmatic person. So I think whatever really works and helps billions of animals for the next 20 years is a good solution.
I would agree. Ultimately, cultivated meat will come from animal cells. And so whether cultivated meat is vegan or not is a question. And that is one that really comes down to individual choice. It depends why you're a vegan. A lot of people are vegan because of the climate implications. And for them, cultivated meat is fine because it's so significantly better. One thing I think I would urge everybody to do is not lose sight of the long-term goal of what cultivated meat is trying to achieve. And this speaks to Rune Christopher's point as well, I think, that when cultivated meat could potentially mean billions of industrial animal agriculture, farmed animals in industrial settings no longer being there, trillions of fish or shellfish not being on people's plates anymore, having a vegan argument which prevents the progress of that on the purity basis would be quite problematic, I think, for what cultivated meat could potentially achieve. It's probably not ever going to be 100% without the use of some kind of animals. But I think, as Maciek was saying, taste, price, convenience, morals are somewhere down in the bottom in terms of what people are looking at when they're buying stuff in the supermarkets. So if we can find ways to feed 10 billion people in a significantly better way, I think we shouldn't try to, we should always be looking for the best possible way to do that, but we should be looking pragmatically as much as we can as well about what the potential is for that.
Great. So I think it's time for the last question, and we have to close off. There were few of those talking about healthy eating and how much focus should be placed on creating healthiest possible products. How much of the narrative should be focused on health benefits of switching to plant-based diet, both staple and tech. There was even a question about reaching medical professionals and medical communities, which I actually have some experience in, but what do you think about this approach of focusing on health? The problem, one of them that I think of is whether it would possibly urge people to eat more chicken if we were to focus on health heavily, but I think still it's an example worth using. What is your approach in creating alternatives, for example, that are not always as healthy? Alex, maybe?
Sure.
Or Maciek? Yeah.
Just very quickly, nutrition is absolutely a factor that guides what people are eating. So it's maybe not one of the top ones. Maybe it is. It depends really on the market and the research that you look at. So nutrition is important, definitely. There's huge opportunities with that too. So things like cultivated meats, it will be as nutritious as the inputs that you give to it. So if you want to, you can dial down your cholesterol, you can dial up your nutrients, you can actually make it significantly more nutritious. So there's a lot of opportunities in there, and it's really important that we do value the importance of that, do explore it, and make sure that companies in particular are aware of what their markets are looking for with things like that.
Yeah, I would just briefly add that as our societies get more wealthy and wealthier and wealthier, health becomes important, or becoming a more healthy citizen plays more significant role. People like to think that way. So I would say that to use that argument and to have it in mind when creating solutions, creating new products, I think it's a valid point, just to be brief.
Yeah, on my point, we worked with medical community and we try to encourage them to promote plant-based eating, more plant-based eating for health. And I think it's a very cool approach to speak the voice of professionals.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, of course, there's also the health argument. Both collaborating much more with health professionals is extremely important, but also for the public, it seems like we had the hypothesis that especially men who are above 40 or 50 years, they are generally the ones who eat most meat and are most difficult to reach with all our other arguments. But they have generally, increased risk of heart disease and many other things. So we were inspired by the Game Changers movie. You might remember that scene with the erectile dysfunction. We made our own campaign on plant-rich sex recently, and it was actually positively received, and now we are trying to develop a second part of it, because it does something. And we actually got the feedback from even some tabloid newspaper kind of people, the kind of people who hate our movement, to say, and they were saying, nice campaign, we want more of that. And if they say it, maybe they're right, because they know their readers, and those are some of the people we have a difficulty in reaching. So I do think it's a tricky balance, but there is actually scientific evidence that has been made, research after the Game Changers movie from various countries, so it's getting stronger. It's not just all about sex, but it's just, it does work, it's true.
Yeah, but I would just add one thing, that essentially most of us, maybe all of us, think about ourselves first, and that's why we think about health. It's from egoistic reasons. So this is a good argument also, that we make ourselves better, possibly with plant-based eating as well.
Great. Unfortunately, we have to come to the end, but thank you very much, all of you. It was a great panel, in my opinion, and I hope you liked it too.
Thank
so
you.
thank you very much.
Thank you.